My answer is that biochar is a charcoal that has been refined for the use for biological systems. But the main refinement is to create a fixed, stable carbon which actually stays in the soil or stays in the environment for a very long time. Thousands of years is a kind of number that's put around. It's a very stable form of carbon, and there's kind of like two cycles going on. There's the carbon cycle, and there's carbon which is out of that cycle. And one of the main reasons that people say it's good for climate change and things like that is because what's happened in the past is a lot of the stable carbon that has been outside of the carbon cycle has been stored in the ground as coal, oil, things like that for millions of years. And basically in the last 200 years we've dug it up and we've burnt it, and we've just added that into the carbon cycle which it's been out of, and now we're kind of realizing there's loads of other problems that that's created. And so by re-locking carbon and putting it back in the ground, we can actually have a chance at solving that issue that we've created. The other thing I'd like to ask people here, is there anyone here who's actually got access to a coppice or sustainably managed like biomass production? We have one. That's great. I've got a few at the back there. That's really good. I'll go into talking about like making it in a bit later as well. Also going around, I've produced some slides, some physical slides that don't have technical difficulties. They'll be going around for people to take a look at, and also there's a tube of biochar going around that you can actually have a look and feel of it yourself and understand it. So why is biochar really good for the soil and for the environment other than what I just mentioned? And so biochar has two main features that we're particularly interested in. One of that is the porosity, the porous structure. So actually I'm going to go back a little bit. So when we take, I'm going to go right back actually to the plants. Yeah, as the plants are growing, they're absorbing carbon out of the atmosphere through their leaves, and then they're drawing that into them, and then they're using that carbon as building blocks, as the structure of the stalk, the stem, the branches. So carbon is in all of these things. It's also in us, it's in animals, it's a structure of life basically. And so as that's happening, what we do when we harvest these plants, the wood and things like that, and we dry it out, then when we heat treat that without oxygen, it's called pyrolysis for those technically out there, and what we do is we stabilize that carbon, and then we can put that in the ground. And if you look at it, when the tube goes round, have a little look, there's some big chunks in there and some little chunks, and you can actually, I'm sure you've all seen charcoal pencils, things like that. You can actually see the structure of the wood, the material that's been used has been kept intact, and what we've done is we've driven off all the volatiles, so all of the hydrocarbon chains that are present within the actual structure, we've driven those off, and what we've got is the pure carbon left. Now there's different qualities of charcoal. So you've got barbecue charcoal or lumpwood charcoal. That's made at a lower temperature. That lower temperature charcoal has got more of these volatiles intact within the charcoal. And what that does is that improves the smell, the taste, and also it's easier to light. So that's why people use that kind of charcoal. But when we're making charcoal that we intend for the soil or for remediation, cleanup, things like that, we want a purer carbon. So we do it at a higher temperature and we drive off most of those things. So then what you've got is a more stabilized form of carbon, which actually stays in the soil for basically our lifetime and for generations to come. That's kind of what we're aiming for. Yeah, so going back to the porosity, so charcoal has a really high surface area. I think there's something like an acre of surface area to a square inch of charcoal. So that's like massive. The porosity of it allows the charcoal to, when it's in the soil, to absorb water and to hold it. It becomes like little reservoirs of water. So if you've got like a lot of free draining soil, it'll actually help solve that issue. And while it's holding that water, it's also hydrophobic, so it actually keeps little pockets of air inside the pores. So you've got this structure which holds both water and air, which are both life-giving properties. Now that, having that available in your soil is then able to enable all the microbes and all the other microorganisms to function well, because they've got access to both water and air. Also, if there's like we're getting a lot of rainfall, you might say, well, actually, water's not a problem. Well, actually, it's storing the air as well. So if you've got too much water, it'll actually provide air in the soil as well. Hopefully, we'll get the presentation up, and I'll have a few more diagrams and things to help explain what I'm talking about. So yeah, the other aspect is the high surface area and the cation exchange property. So if you've got clay soil, if you understand your soil, you'll understand what cation exchange property is. It's a kind of mechanism or a measure of how well your soil can hold on to nutrients and other good factors that we want in our soil. So biochar has this property. It's a negatively ionic charged thing which draws positive ions to it, and then it holds them in an ionic level, on an ionic level, which isn't like a physical level. So that makes sure that the nutrients and things like that are still readily available through water solubility. It's not like a physical bond where it's actually bound the nutrients and they're just stuck there. They're just they're kind of held like static electricity. So when you get a balloon and you rub it on your hair and the hair sticks to the balloon, it's that kind of charge which is drawing the nutrients towards it and then holding them there, ready to be released by the other things in the soil web that bring those to the root exudates of the plant. So when you apply the biochar to the soil, looks like we're winning. So when you apply the biochar to the soil and into your root zone, like, you're having a massive benefit there, reducing the amount of like leaching. You know, big scale farmers have a massive problem with this, where they're you know, they're spraying loads of fertilizer and then the rains come and just wash it all in the river. So by having biochar down, actually acts like a barrier for that to actually escape. I'm all a bit excited because I haven't really used the presentation before, so I'm going to try and like find where we are for a moment. I'll go back. Yeah, so basically what I'm really into is helping people unlock the innate fertility of the soil, because actually a lot of things are there. I've always had this question, you know, why are all these gardeners, like everywhere I go to these gardens, it's all about compost, bringing in these inputs, and it's like, why isn't the soil just kind of automatically doing it? You know, I'm sure that's what our ancestors did in the past, and I do actually believe that that is possible, and I personally think that biochar is the key to unlocking that. So that's kind of what I'm about. We've gone through the biochar, we've gone through those. We can see there's an image here that shows the biochar in action. Because when you've got a good balance of air, water, nutrient holding capacity, one thing I neglected to tell about is the capacity of it to hold microbes. So and the microorganisms. So underneath the soil, you've got the food chain of the soil web. And what happens is if there's an imbalance in your soil web, you've got too many predators, too many nematodes or protozoas and stuff like that, some of these bigger ones, they can tend to eat all of the tiny little microorganisms, and then when they never know when they're done, you know, apart from at the end when they've eaten them all and they realise, oh no, there's nothing left, you know, and then when that happens, they all die because they all starve. So what the biochar does is it provides a safe haven for these microorganisms to go and colonise in these little pores in the charcoal, and so they always stay alive. And by creating this haven, then they go out and they keep the rest of the soil, the food chain alive. So it's a kind of foundational structure that we're like adding here, which results in much better fertility, which you will see in the health of your plants, the vigour of them. We'll talk a bit more about that later in the slide. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the history. I mean, charcoal has been around since day dot. When we learnt about fire, basically, we would have learnt about making charcoal then. But why are we kind of learning about biochar like now? Why haven't we learned about it before? Those kind of things. In the Amazon basin, which is where the term terra preta was coined. Terra preta is Portuguese for black earth. in the Amazon basin, the world's biggest river, the force is so big that it actually leaches nutrients out of the soil and flushes them all out to sea. And in that process, it makes some of the world's poorest soil. Now, the Amazon settlers in the area, they basically had two options: either to learn to work with nature and understand it better and produce a solution, or go to war with their neighbours. You know, unfortunately, they choose to work with nature and really understand what was going on. And I mean, history only knows how they actually worked out doing this. Maybe they had fire pits, and realised that wherever they had these fire pits and the charcoal remained, they could see that the plants would be better. Who knows? But they worked this out, and they started using this practice of making the charcoal and adding it to their soil, and they lived like that for generations and generations and generations, and they actually built massive civilizations. On the slides I've sent around, there is a picture that kind of shows a pictorial vision of what they thought the civilization looked like. Some of the big like pyramids in the hills there. And the reason we know this is because archaeologists who worked in the area, when they were digging down, they found these like huge pots, huge clay pots, which showed that they were actually cooking and congregating and eating together in their hundreds. And they were like, how were these people feeding, how are they feeding this many people on the poorest soil, you know? And then they looked a bit deeper and they realised that it was the fixed carbon content that was added to the soil. And at first they thought that that was came about through volcanic activity or other natural processes, but then they actually realised that they pieced some of these pots together and realised that some of these clay pots were actually like retorts that they were using for making biochar, and so they were actually making charcoal on quite a civilised scale, adding it to their soil, and over time, generations of doing this, they actually made a topsoil of like over 2 meters deep in a lot of areas. Now, when we talk about like topsoil, we're usually talking about like the top 15 centimeters. You know, so imagine having a topsoil of 2 meters. But they did this over time, and and what happened is 2,000 years later, when the Europeans were going over and colonising other parts of the world, they took their diseases with them, and they actually wiped out this huge civilization. And at that point, they didn't realise what they had kind of lost. It was only until the 1960s, when explorers were going over there and doing their archaeological digs, that they actually found this. This image that you see here at the top is actually taken by NASA, and they actually, like NASA could actually see these areas where the crops were doing like really well. So they realised they managed to map out all of the sites of where the terra preta was actually made. So it's a terra preta is an anthropological soil, like a man-made soil. when they discovered it in the 60s, they were like, wow, we've got this fertile soil. They started digging it up and like sending it back home to their mates. Oh, we found this soil, this is great, get this in your garden, you know. But by the time it had got there, it was dead, you know, and actually it didn't really do much at all, you know. And they were like really confused about this. And it just goes to show that, you know, it's a relationship that we have with the soil, you know, and it's a living thing that we can actually work with. So, what we really need to do is create these terra pretas wherever we are in our own gardens to create this kind of resilience. Because a lot of the problems that they were facing back then, like some say they started about 4,000 years ago, 4,000 to 2,000 years ago was when they were actually started making this terra preta. But like now, globally, we're seeing dust bowls are being created all around the world. Soil loss is like, even in Britain, you know, green and pleasant land, like the statistics are saying that we're losing like 3,000, what's that, got a slide somewhere? 3 million tons of topsoil each year. That's about 6,000 hectares. Yeah, so this is a solution to actually reversing that problem. You know, scarcity is like one of the things that drives these corporations. Actually, if we create abundance, we build security in ourselves for the next generation, so we can actually stand up and actually not be dictated to. So I believe that this is a way that we can actually like build that resilience if we start to do it. And there's also other benefits. This terra preta soil in the Amazon basin, they had made it so rich that the soil actually started to build itself. This is the bit where it was like we don't need to bring the compost in. It's because the soil is actually growing itself. Using natural, like nature works in a very slow rate. Where have I got it? Yeah, to make 1 centimetre cubed of soil takes 200 to 400 years. Now the terra preta in the Amazon basin was growing at 1 centimetre a year. And the reason why it does that is because of this cation exchange property that it has, and all of the dying matter, as these organisms that are living in the soil are living and dying, the rate that they're dying at is then just getting absorbed by the charcoal. But it takes, we have to get to a certain rate of the amount of charcoal to soil organic matter. So that ratio is quite important, and that takes time to build up. You can't do magic overnight and then get loads of crops, because that's not going to happen. So what I recommend is that every time that you're putting charcoal, every time that you're adding this organic matter to your soil, that's the time to get the charcoal in. If you consistently do that at a rate of around 15%, or 1/6, it's going to be different. Like that's kind of what they found in the terra preta soil. So I'm kind of using that as a figure to work with. But if you want to get like, you have to understand your own soil to know the actual true rate of what it is for your soil. And it also depends on what you're growing as well, because different plants like different things. If you're growing more acidic kind of plants, you're going to not need so much biochar. But if you want like more neutral or alkaline loving plants, then biochar is the way to go. But you can over alkalize as well. So you kind of got to work with a rate, and that takes some understanding of your own soil and your own plants. And I have to leave that to you. I can't know everyone's sort of soil, unfortunately. Here we've just got a little pictogram which kind of shows the interactions that the biochar is having with the microorganisms and the root exudates, and the water and aeration. So that's just showing how all of these things work together. And then over time, it takes, if you were to do as I suggested and put 15% biochar in with your organic matter, over time, like you'll see some improvements in your soil. It'll be able to hold water, it'll be able to aerate, it'll be benefiting your microbes. All of these things are immediate. But then you won't necessarily see that in your plants for up to about 5 years. Because the soil web's such a living thing, it takes all of these processes to kind of to filter down. And I went and lived on a farm that was doing these biochar trials for 3 years. The guy had already started the using biochar. He was the guy who inspired me, basically. And and then I actually saw it with my own eyes. It kind of like, it really just like came to life. But I'll talk about that in a little bit. How am I doing at the time? 10:02, okay. Right, I've been waffling on. So I'm going to do, on Sunday, I'm going to do a demonstration of how to make biochar. So maybe I'll talk more about that. If people are interested in making biochar, come along to that. It's on the, I'm not sure what time it is, but it's on Sunday, and it'll be just past the garden up by the entrance. So I'll talk more about that then. We're going to do a very simple way of doing it, so you can actually see the charring process, and it'll be a very basic way that people can just get on and do it. I've passed around the thing with all the pictures here, which actually show there's loads of ways of making biochar. They've all got their pros and cons. Come to me with your questions during that workshop and we'll go through that then. Here I've got this little graph here at the side. It's also on the thing that went round. And what this is actually showing is the two different soils. So we've got the poor soil, which in the Amazon, which is ultrasol, and then we've got the biochar inoculated soil, and further down the graph is the depth. So that's going down to like 1 meter deep. So they were doing this over generations. So that's how they built this 2 meter deep topsoil. And it's actually showing the actual the concentrations of like nutrients and minerals, how much is being held. So as we can see here, like the amount that's available to the plants at all different levels is much higher than without the biochar. So the way to get the biochar into your soil is one with a mulch. So put a layer down and then put your mulch on top. You can dig it in, but that has its own negative effects. Like if you're growing potatoes though, or root vegetables that you're digging up, that's a really good opportunity to get the biochar in deep, because if you're going to be disturbing the soil, get it in there, you know. So that's a good opportunity. Also in your compost, you've got your compost pile. A lot of people want this really fast compost. You put loads of stuff on, get loads of heat in, and then that compost goes down and you've got this nice soil and you think, oh great, it's ready. But the rate that compost goes down, you've just lost a lot of life there that actually could go into your beds. By getting the biochar into your compost, as the compost is breaking down, a lot of those microorganisms, nutrients are actually getting absorbed into the biochar, and a lot of it's getting lost. Less of it is getting lost. The guy who I was learning from, he was more into this actually slowing down the process of composting, because actually what that does is it means that all the nutrients and all of the organic matter is bioavailable to your plants and the soil web for a longer period of time, and we're actually losing a lot less of it. Animals, yeah, if you keep animals, that's a good way of getting biochar into your system. You can actually feed the animals a percentage of biochar. It's actually a medicine, you can buy it in the pharmacy. By eating the biochar, it will pass right through their system, and they will actually inoculate the biochar with the biome that's actually in them, and then when they pass it out, they'll even stamp it into the ground for you, you know. So that is another way of getting biochar into your soil. Or you could actually put it in the bed if you've got stables or where you're keeping your animals. You can actually put it down as bedding. They will defecate into that, and that will get absorbed into the biochar. They'll also crush it into smaller particles, which increases the cation exchange property, and it also reduces the smell and makes your poo lighter. Cover crops, I've not really worked with a system with cover crops. I know it's a great system. I don't know, I'd love to work with people to work out a way of getting biochar into that system. The idea I have at the moment is probably when you're spreading the seeds of the cover crop, that's probably the time to put the biochar down, and then the cover crop will provide, because you don't really want the biochar just exposed to the elements. That's one way that the biochar actually breaks down, so you kind of want it covered. So that's just my thoughts on that. I think I've gone through all of these things. That one there, the second one up, is the kind of diagram of, it's not very clear actually, but that just shows how it also holds air and water at the same time. So it aerates when your soil's too wet, and it holds water when your soil's too dry. Yeah, so as I was saying, I lived on a small holding in the Gower, learning about this process. We had 100-metre long beds, and about 1/3 of that we'd never put any biochar down, and then all the rest of it we were putting biochar down. We had all these crazy contraptions that were making biochar every time we had lunch, dinner, heating our spaces. We were making biochar, and yeah, we weren't really using compost. We were using mulches. A lot of it we used a lot of wood chip and grass mainly. And at first, I just thought, well, you know, I saw the plants and I was like, is this really working? I was a little bit skeptical. It didn't look like much different from other places where they were doing no-dig organic gardening. And then like year 4 came along, and there was quite a noticeable difference in the plant growth. And I was like, oh, actually, maybe something is happening. And then the 5th year, after we were putting the biochar down, you'd walk down the path, and it'd be like the same plants, we had sown them at the same time. There'd be this path where there's biochar and no biochar, and it would be like up here, and then when there's no biochar, it was like down here. And yeah, it was amazing. There was like parsnips like as big as your arm, beetroots as big as your head. It was like, whoa, who's gonna eat these? You know, we need like communities. You know, I was like thinking of these people with their big pots feeding hundreds of people. I was like, this is how they do it. And but it was really hard to, like, you know, he's doing a veg box scheme, and it was like, you know, people see this beetroot and be like, what do I do with that? You know, so we had to start like planting things closer together to actually make them compete to be like a normal size. And I was just like, wow, this biochar really is like doing what it's like cracked up to be, basically. So that's kind of what sold me. And yeah, that was about 10, 11 years ago when I started making the biochar. I come from an engineering background. I started making the burners first, and then I started with my own little growing project. Then I moved to his for a little while, and I just carried on developing the technology to get it out there so people could make their own biochar. And last year I got access to a coppice, so I've started making my own biochar. And if anyone wants any biochar, come and see me throughout. So I'll just quickly go through the pros and cons of making or buying biochar. So biochar can be quite expensive. People think, oh, it's quite expensive. There's a lot of labour that goes into a lot of thankless labour. It's quite hard. So that's what puts the price up mainly. But it lasts forever, basically. So it's a really good investment. It's not like, you know, you buy a sack of compost and then, like, you know, 6 months it's gone. You know, you're going to put it down. Yeah, you put a little bit down, but it's going to be there next year. You put a little bit more down on top. It's an investment for, you know, for your future generations, basically. The main thing that holds people back is feedstock availability. If you're lucky enough to have enough land that's got a woodland that you can manage, that's great. Definitely, like, get on making biochar. You can make it on a small scale though. If you've got an allotment, you could plant like 3 little willow trees in the corner and have a little rotation. You can also be collecting all your you know, your perennial cuttings and drying them out and just making it with your, like, making a cup of tea. You can make some biochar at the same time. Over time it builds up. Little and often is kind of like the key, basically. Time and effort, you know, it does take a bit of time, and strategic thinking, and there's a lot of that when it comes to gardening. So sometimes that puts people off doing it. You know, there's a lot of key players out there that are a little bit susceptible to, like, biochar. I think Charles Dowding's warming up to it a little bit, but I think, like, some people are a bit like, oh no, I don't know about it. And I think the reason why they're unsure is because they don't have time. You know, it takes time, and so that's a reason to buy it. And then also, like, convenience. But if you can make it, then you've got control over the quality. It's more, you're fostering that relationship a bit more. I think like building this relationship with the land is like really important, and you know, it's hard work, so I'd rather other people be making it, so I encourage you to do that. So the future of biochar, so I've got like some statistics here. They might not be too accurate, but it's quite a good ballpark to play with to see the actual like potential here. So according to my research that I've done, there are 4,000 organic and regenerative projects in the UK, occupying maybe as little as 2% of the land. Then you've got all of the other corporations and the big agribusinesses that are kind of managing 66% of the land. But their practices are unsustainable. They're the ones that are actually killing this 3 million tonnes of topsoil each year. Whereas organic no-dig soil is actually 5 times more fertile than the soil that they're working with. Now when you start adding biochar to that, and you can create the conditions for 50% more higher yields, that kind of becomes 10% more fertile. So if every organic and regenerative project in the UK on that 2% of land was to adopt biochar this year and started adding it year on year, in 5 years' time, that would be the equivalent of them producing 20% of what we're actually, what they're generating now, and that's like a third of what these big agribusinesses are doing, and they're actually reducing their time. So we're actually closing the gap. So that small 2% can start to have a massive impact on agriculture in the UK. Yeah, so that's me. I started Preta, trying to empower growers to cultivate gardens of resilience by providing biochar products, the equipment, and any consultation and training. Just go on the website and book me in, and I'll come and help you with your project, basically. Great, thanks for your time. If we have got any time for questions, I don't know. 10 minutes? Oh, great. Questions? Hello, sir.
Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I was pretty sceptical a few years ago, but I've sort of come round in a sense. I make a lot of compost, sort of with tractors and in windrows. I've got a couple of questions. One is, you didn't mention much about the release, the proportion. I've sort of been convinced that it's not detrimental to the climate. I think the climate question is a very important one. That we're actually burning, living material, and we're burning trees to produce this stuff. But I am sort of, the balance is, for me, has gone, but that's only a personal. And we could probably ask Charles why he's starting to come round to it, as you said, tomorrow, because he's going to be here tomorrow, which is great. The other thing is, yes, I haven't got enough time as a grower to actually produce it myself. As much as I'd like to do it, I can't. So I would want to buy it in sort of dumpy bags, and I just wonder, how do we access that? Because I think it's not that easily accessible in larger quantities, so I'm going to put it into my compost.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a good point. I mean, I do sell it in dumpy bags, but I mean, if I sold it all in dumpy bags, it wouldn't go very far, to be honest. There are companies out there that are a bit more established, like Carbon Gold, for instance. There are these big machines, basically. They're kind of, they're actually using them for power generation. So they're using the energy of the heat that's produced from the biochar, and they're converting that into electricity. These big machines, they're running 24/7, 365 times of the year, but like you say, that's using a lot of wood, basically, a lot of a lot of inputs, and it's very hard to trace where those inputs are coming from. I watched a report not that long ago that was saying that some of these places that are producing biochar on that scale were actually using like rainforest timber, which is kind of one of the reasons why I encourage people to make it on a smaller scale where they are, because then that way you can actually like manage, we can actually meet the demand, you know, but it does take a bit of like rejigging of how the land is used and how people are spending their time on that land. I mean, myself, I've been working on farms for over 10 years, different small holdings, mainly like organic, like no dig small holdings. I love being out there, but actually working in the trees and doing the coppicing, I feel I'm more suited to that. So it's like finding the right people to kind of work in the right places to like meet these things, So I'm not expecting all growers to go out there and start making biochar, but like start forging relationships with other people who've got access to these resources, and I want to help create that. Like I'm hoping to start a little network on my website that starts creating this conversation and getting these things happening. But yeah, like on Sunday when I'm going to show this tool, I've got a small one, but it does make bulk amounts of biochar. I've got a big one which I do for my main production back home, and it's very simple, very easy, and you can make biochar out of your hedge cuttings. So if you're going around with your annual routine of cutting back the hedges, you've got all this brash, a lot of people just pile it up, then just burn it, and you've got this big smoky fire, and you're left with a pile of ash, But just with a little bit of an ingenuity and a little bit more thought process about what you're doing, you can actually be turning that into biochar.
Just thinking about like field scale veg reduction on like 50, 60 acres and using machinery. If you were to apply it at the green manure stage, could you spread it with some tractor mounted spreader?
Yeah, I reckon so. I mean, I've worked mainly on farms that are doing everything kind of by hand, really. So I'm not so used. I don't know all the different contraptions. There is. I was hoping to go to a talk that Tully's doing that's going into the kind of machinery side, because I want to understand a bit more of that. But I reckon there is, like, you've got these seed drills and things like that, and these rollers with holes in.
Yeah.
Some of these things could be used to carry out that job.
What form does it come in? Maybe a stupid question.
You saw the little tube that got passed around?
Oh, sorry, I joined late.
Okay, there's a little tube here. One thing I didn't mention is so I sell my pure biochar in, it's got bigger chunks and it's got smaller chunks. Now the bigger chunks are good for holding water and air, and also improving the soil structure by like breaking up clays and things like that, whereas the smaller stuff has a higher cation exchange which holds on to the nutrients. So having a mixed balance of these things, you're making the benefit of all of those things. Diversity is key. You first.
Just a question about, do you charge your biochar? Do you recommend charging it before to the soil? Because some says that when it goes into the soil it takes nutrients out, and that's why you said that maybe 5 years after. what you're...
Great question. Yeah, I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you've got poor soil that's missing in certain things, and you know you need those things for your plants that you're growing, then yeah, charge it. But when you charge it, you also lock out what's in your soil web from getting into the charcoal. So if you've got fairly good soil, I sell pure, so I've got these bags here that are pure charcoal, and then the tubes are a specific blend that is charged as a soil conditioner, and it's good for seedlings and transplants basically. So yeah, I recommend working with the soil web that you've got, and then once you understand your soil a bit better and you realise what's missing, then you can start making compost teas, making specific fertilisers up, charging your charcoal and getting that in there to improve your soil profile.
Yeah, my question was about the activation of main BioChar.
Yeah.
I actually have a lot of that. Do you know how much absorption rate there is in charcoal? Because we try to figure out like how much if you put chicken manures with the charcoal, how much of this nitrogen is actually in the charcoal? Like how much does it contain?
I don't know. I guess that you would have to go right down to the cation exchange level and really understand how that cation exchange mechanism works, and that will be down to so the type of wood that you're using, or the biomass that you're using to make the biochar will create like a different surface area, it'll have a different porosity, and so that will change. If you've got like a dense wood, if you're using like oak or hornbeam or something like that, that's quite dense, probably have a bigger surface area than something like willow or a faster growing plant. Yeah, good question.
I've got a question. I just wanted to hear your two favourite designs of burners or retorts. Firstly, what's the simplest way that we can kind of create it from dry brash? So like brash piles in the wood that you've dried out over a year or two. What's the simplest way to turn them into biochar? Quick and easy. And then secondly, what's your best design for a small scale one for heating, like boiling a kettle or water?
The simplest way is to dig a pit, and there's a pit burn technique. So on Sunday I'll be showing this pit burn technique using a flame cap kiln, which is like an above ground pit basically. So I'll show you that on Sunday, come along and you'll see. On a small scale I'd go for a T-lud. So here there's a little compendium of T-luds. There's loads of different designs. There's some on the market. I'm hoping to bring out going to production next year. New one. Sparrow?
Just going to make an announcement. If anybody's left their cars down here, then please leave them because it's got making it in. So keep your cars anywhere on site except the car park, basically. So please leave it to the car park.
Yeah, if anyone wants to like stay in contact, come and share details, and if you have any questions, just come and find me. And if you also, likewise, if you want any biochar, come and find me, and we'll sort that out. Thank you very much for your time.